"You're not one of us anymore," my dad wrote. "Don't show your face here again." I didn't argue. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I just closed my end of the escrow, notified the trust officer of my withdrawal, and filed the legal separation from our shared assets. By sunrise, my sister texted me in all caps, "What did you do?" I just laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was done. Then my mom's attorney sent, "We need to talk. Today." Without thinking twice, I poured myself a cup of tea, watched the steam rise, and smiled for the first time in years. It wasn't relief. Not quite. It was something colder, more solid, like ice snapping underfoot after holding weight too long. But to explain how we got here, I need to go back. I am Clarissa Grant, the only daughter in the Grant family. A family built on stone legacy and cold hotel lobbies with white marble floors. The Grants own a string of boutique hotels across the country. My father, Robert Grant, always said hospitality was in our blood, but what he meant was control was in his blood. He built the business with his own hands, or so he liked to say. Truth is, my grandfather built the first two locations. My dad expanded it, yes, but with help. Mostly help he never acknowledged. My younger brother Lucas was the heir. Even before we could spell inheritance, it was made clear that the family named the business the attention, it all belonged to him. I was the afterthought, the creative one, the emotional one, the distraction. So I found my own path. I built my own company, a boutique marketing agency that ironically ended up managing every single Grant Hotel campaign since 2014. Not that anyone outside the boardroom ever knew. My name was never listed on their website. I wasn't invited to the gala events or mentioned in the press releases. But when there was a PR disaster in Denver, I fixed it. When they lost occupancy during the pandemic, I ran the digital campaigns that brought them back. Quietly. Always quietly. That was my job. Be helpful, be invisible. I had never said no. Not once. When they asked for emergency funds to cover a renovation gap in Tahoe, I wired it. When Lucas needed a bridge loan after blowing half the quarterly budget on influencer packages, I extended my line of credit. No thank you ever came, just the next request. And the next. Until one Tuesday night, Lucas called, sounded nervous, said they had run into a bit of trouble with a contractor. There were accusations, possibly legal action. He needed help. He didn't say please, just assumed. I said I can't. Not this time. Not angrily, not defensively, just tired. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "I'll talk to Dad." That was the last time I heard his voice. 2 days later, that message came through. "You're not one of us anymore." 6 words. That's all it took to erase decades of quiet labor midnight meetings and bank wires under their name. I stared at it. Not in shock, not in sadness. I felt something else, a kind of silence inside me that I had never felt before, like the moment right after a power outage, when the hum disappears, and you realize how loud it had always been. I looked around my apartment. My kids were asleep. My husband was working late. The takeout I had ordered was still warm, untouched. I walked to the window, looked out at the skyline, and made a decision. If I was no longer part of them, then I would no longer carry them. They thought they were cutting me out, but they forgot the house stood on the beams I laid down. So I started the process. Quietly, neatly, closed my end of the escrow, pulled my name from the long-term development deal in Savannah, forwarded the trust withdrawal notice to the legal counsel, froze the internal transfer channels that moved money from my business into theirs. Every connection, every silent wire, every hidden patch I had built to cover their mistakes, I unplugged it all, not out of revenge, out of recognition. This was not an act of war. This was the moment I realized I was free. They didn't push me away. They gave me permission to walk. And I walked. The Grant family liked to pretend everything we had was built from scratch. My father used to say we're self-made, as if we'd planted the foundation ourselves and hauled the stones up a mountain. But the truth was simpler, less poetic. My grandfather opened a modest lodge in Vermont after World War II, and over the years turned it into a 2-location operation, one in the mountains, one near the coast. By the time my father inherited the business, it was already steady and profitable. But he expanded it, rebranded, streamlined, turned Grant Hospitality Group into a name that carried some weight. He took the bones of the old family business and gave it a new face, his face. And when my brother Lucas turned 18, he declared it would someday become his legacy too. I was never mentioned. My mother Elise was the type of woman who never raised her voice, but somehow still managed to silence a room. She believed in structured tradition and carrying out your duty with a smile. She wore pearls to breakfast and hosted fundraising events like it was her profession, though she never worked a day outside the home. Still, she ran the Grant family image like a campaign. Growing up, I learned quickly where I stood. Not in the spotlight, not on stage. I was backstage. Useful? Yes. Valued. That was less clear. In high school, I won a national design contest. My art teacher cried. My parents barely reacted. "That's nice, Clarissa," my mother had said. "But we need to focus on your brother's college applications." Lucas was always the priority. When he failed his first year of business school, they blamed the curriculum. When I graduated summa cum laude from NYU, they sent a polite text. After college, I built my own career in branding and marketing. Within 5 years, my agency, Brightbound Creative, was serving hospitality clients across the East Coast. When a scandal hit the Grant Hotel in Denver, something about a guest's lawsuit gone viral, my father called me. Not to apologize for years of neglect, but to ask for help. And I gave it. I rebuilt their brand image from the ground up, turned their digital presence from outdated and amateur to sleek and modern. I negotiated partnerships with travel influencers, created a luxury loyalty program, even managed the design of their mobile app. All of it quietly, all of it under Brightbound's name, but with none of the credit. In the press, it was Lucas who had revived the brand. Lucas who pivoted Grant Hospitality into the digital era. I didn't care. Or at least I told myself I didn't. Because that's what you do when you're the fixer. You convince yourself you don't need the applause as long as the work is good, as long as the structure holds. But over time, the cracks showed. Lucas had a habit of spending beyond budget. Flashy ideas, spontaneous hires, expensive gifts to partners that were never logged as expenses. I covered them, not just with strategy, but with money. When the Tahoe location ran over budget during renovations, I personally loaned the project $150,000 from my own accounts. My father never said thank you. He simply added my name to an internal memo and told me that'll be covered eventually. Eventually came and went. The Charlotte Hotel's launch was a disaster. They missed their occupancy targets by 30%. The reason Lucas had approved a regional ad campaign that never ran because the vendor wasn't paid. Guess who stepped in? My team ran a new campaign free of charge and got them back on track in 6 weeks. Again, no public credit, no compensation. But I told myself I was helping the family. That legacy mattered. That love didn't need receipts. Even when my own family, my husband, my kids, asked why I kept giving so much of myself to people who barely looked me in the eye at dinner, I didn't have an answer. It's just how it was. My mother ran a small nonprofit focused on historic preservation. Officially, it was a separate entity. In practice, it was funded monthly by a standing auto transfer from one of my holding accounts. My accountant once asked me if I wanted to formalize the donation. I said no. I didn't want to embarrass her. Lucas drove a car registered to a Grant Hotel company, but leased under my LLC's credit. It was easier that way, my father said, to keep everything in-house. I didn't argue. I just kept paying the insurance premium. Even the very software their hotel operations ran on, inventory systems, customer retention programs, CRM dashboards, were licensed through platforms my company managed. When a billing issue came up, my staff fixed it. When training was needed, my staff provided it. Still, my seat at the table was always temporary. I was called in when something broke, and when it was fixed, I was excused. I remember once during a holiday dinner, Lucas raised a toast to the team that keeps this empire running. He meant his managers. He didn't look at me once. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. It was subtle, but I felt it. That whisper of shame, that hollow in my chest that came from giving and never being truly seen. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval, but the truth is I did. Or at least I used to. That's why the message from my dad hit differently. Not because it was cruel, not even because it was final, but because for the first time in my life, I realized they meant it. They didn't see me as family. Not really. They saw me as a resource, a utility, a fallback plan. And when I finally said I can't help this time, they shut the door. That was the moment everything I had been holding together for so long finally broke apart. But in the space where it cracked, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Freedom. It was a Thursday evening when the message came. I had just tucked the kids into bed. My youngest had fallen asleep with a book on her chest, and I quietly eased it from her hands, kissed her forehead, and stepped out of the room. The house was still. My husband was working late at the studio. I walked into the kitchen, reheated leftovers, and settled onto the couch, remote in hand, ready to finally have a moment of quiet. That's when my phone buzzed. At first I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Until the screen lit up with a single notification that stopped everything. A message from my father. "You're not one of us anymore. Don't show your face here again." Just that. No greeting, no explanation, no conversation. I read it once. Then again. I sat completely still, the container of food untouched in my lap. The weight of those 2 sentences felt disproportionate to their length. They were short, cold, surgical. But they landed like a court ruling, final, unyielding. For a moment, I expected something else to follow. Another text, maybe a correction, a clarification, even a cruel joke. But nothing came. I placed the container on the coffee table, locked my phone, and stood up. Not because I was upset, not because I needed air. I just couldn't sit anymore. I walked around the house. No destination, just movement. My chest wasn't tight. My throat didn't close up. There were no tears threatening to spill. It wasn't pain that hit me. It was recognition, like a switch flipping in the dark. They had said what they really meant. And for the first time, I believed them. 2 days earlier, Lucas had called me again. The third time in a week. He sounded rushed, annoyed, like his own failure was somehow an inconvenience for everyone else. He said they were behind on final payments to a contractor for the Jacksonville location. Legal threats were flying. He needed a quick transfer just to smooth things over. He said it like he was asking for a favor, but I knew better. It was an expectation. I told him no. I didn't elaborate. I didn't mention the internal staff restructuring at my agency, the rising payroll, the fact that one of my largest retainer clients had paused for a quarter due to budget cuts. I just said, "It's getting tight for me right now." He didn't ask why. He didn't offer alternatives. He just went quiet. Then coldly said, "I'll let Dad know." That was Tuesday. And now it was Thursday, and I was no longer one of them. I didn't reply to the message. There was no point. You don't negotiate with people who've already decided who you are to them. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I didn't even feel anger, just focus. The first thing I did was log into the escrow account. It held joint investment funds between my agency and Grant Holdings money I had seeded to help with the development of 3 boutique expansions. Without hesitation, I signed the release and initiated a full withdrawal. Next, I pulled up the trust documents. My father was always proud of our family trust. He'd say things like, "This family is built on structure like that made us unbreakable." But really, it made us brittle. I notified the trust officer of my formal removal from all shared holdings voting rights and future financial participation. At 10:03 p.m., I sent the notarized documents and closed the laptop. The next morning, the letter arrived. No envelope, no postage, just a plain white sheet of paper folded 3 times and shoved through the slot like a flyer. My name wasn't on it, just 5 words typed in bold, uneven font. "Don't show your face here again." It was colder than the text, sharper, like it had been printed in anger. I read it once, then again. Then I walked to the sink, poured myself coffee, and started reviewing financial records, quietly, methodically. My husband noticed the calm. He didn't ask questions. He just stood beside me, rubbed my back gently, and went back to brushing the kids' teeth. By lunchtime, I had terminated all auto payments tied to the family. The monthly wire that had kept my mother's nonprofit afloat Gone. The payment loop that covered Lucas's PR team deleted. The software subscriptions for the hotel systems revoked. I didn't leave a note. I didn't warn anyone. By evening, the cracks began to show. At 5:41 a.m., my sister texted, "What did you do?" I stared at it and laughed. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because for the first time in years, I realized they had no idea how much I had been doing. At 8:12 a.m., my mother's attorney emailed. Subject line, urgent. Request to discuss asset status. Message, your withdrawal has triggered alerts. Please call today. I didn't rush to answer. I went for a walk first. The sky was cloudy, but the air felt clearer than it had in weeks. When I finally called back, his tone was cautious smooth, but I could hear the urgency in his voice, the questions behind the polished words. I told him plainly, there's nothing to discuss. My involvement ended when your client told me I didn't belong. He stammered, said perhaps this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe feelings were running high. No, I said, this isn't about feelings, this is about facts. And the fact is, I'm done cleaning up after people who treat me like a utility. He paused, then asked, would you consider pausing the withdrawal process? I smiled. It's already done. By noon that same Friday, I had drawn up a complete list of every connection, legal, financial, digital, that tied me to the Grant family. There were more than I expected. Not because I hadn't been keeping track. I had. In fact, I knew exactly what belonged to me and what didn't. But what surprised me was just how much of their infrastructure depended on me, silently, invisibly. That's what happens when you always say yes. You become the scaffolding no one sees until it's gone. I started with the obvious, the downtown office lease. It was in my name. Not officially, but through a shell LLC I'd created years ago to help them avoid certain tax brackets. They never even thanked me for that. Just signed the dotted lines and moved in. I terminated the lease that morning. Not immediately. Just gave them 60 days notice, enough to cause panic, not chaos. Next came the enterprise software suite. The Grant Hotels operated on a tiered hotel management system, custom-coded integrations, central reservation software, customer data segmentation, all of it licensed through my company. Lucas didn't know the admin passwords. He never needed them. He just logged in and assumed everything worked. I deactivated the admin tier revoked access and sent a formal termination to the vendor. By 3:00 p.m., my assistant messaged, we've received 3 calls from Grant Holdings. Do you want to respond? I didn't. By dinner, I'd reviewed and canceled every transfer schedule, the one that sent $12,000 monthly to cover shortfalls at the Tahoe location, the one that funded my mom's nonprofit every first Monday of the month, the emergency line tied to Lucas's project spending card, gone. All of them. I had kept those lines running out of guilt, out of loyalty, out of the deeply embedded belief that family was worth the wait. But loyalty only works when it flows in both directions. And theirs had dried up a long time ago. That night at 5:08 a.m., my sister texted again. What did you do? Everything's locked. I let the phone vibrate against the nightstand. I didn't open it. At 8:17 a.m., another email came in. My mom's lawyer again. We need to talk. Please. This is escalating. I didn't answer. Instead, I spent the morning drafting closure documents. Legal detachment from all joint entities. The Denver flat co-owned by me through a property development trust transferred out. The marketing retainers listed as family assets removed. The consulting clause in the hotel's master contracts with my agency terminated. I send everything through a secure client portal with a single message, effective immediately. No further services will be rendered. Ownership and control withdrawn. By early afternoon, calls started flooding in. First Lucas, then Mom, then the operations director from Grant Hotel Group, all with the same tone, confused urgency. They hadn't realized what I had done, not just in the last 24 hours, but over the last decade. They thought I'd been supporting them. I was, but not the way they thought. They assumed my contributions were small supplemental, but in reality, my company, my systems, my credit, and my strategy were the spine of their machine. And now the spine was gone. By 3:00 p.m., my mother's lawyer called again. This time he didn't waste time with formalities. Can we come to some sort of pause? He asked. A temporary freeze. Just to stabilize the trust, I told him no. He asked what it would take to negotiate. I told him he was too late. It was never a negotiation. They just didn't see it until now. At 4:30 p.m., my dad broke his silence. An email, one line. Fix this now. No greeting, no context, just the same controlling tone he'd used my whole life. I didn't reply, but I printed it, highlighted it, filed it in a folder marked Contact, no response. By the end of the day, I received a call from Greystone Bank Commercial Lending. A woman named Natalie asked if I was confirming the deactivation of the business card tied to the Grand Hotel Group's vendor account. I told her yes. She asked if I wanted to notify the other cardholders. I said no. They'll find out soon enough. She paused, then quietly added, they already have. I knew what that meant. The cards were declining. The vendors were blocking shipments. Payment terms were being retracted. Because Greenspine, what they thought was their foundation, was actually mine. Lucas may have been the face. My father may have been the name. But I was the guarantor, the underwriter, the silent partner. They never would have qualified for those vendor lines without my company's financial backing. Not after the IRS audit 8 years ago. Not after Lucas's failed equity flip in 2019. But they had gotten comfortable pretending I was just helping from the sidelines. Now they were realizing I wasn't the helper. I was the system. At 6:00 p.m., my old friend Claire, who handled fulfillment logistics for the hotel chain, called me. Your dad just rang me in a panic, she said. He wanted to know why his suppliers are pulling contracts. He said the payment channels are broken. They're not broken, I told her. They're gone. She was silent for a moment, then said, You okay? I'm better than I've been in years. That night I sat at my desk and reviewed the entire web of connections I had just severed. Each one a thread in a fabric I had spent years weaving for people who never once asked what it cost me. They thought this was about money. It wasn't. It was about being seen, about being heard, or maybe it was about no longer letting myself be erased. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the window, and let the night air in. There was no celebration, no fireworks, just quiet, peaceful, solid, still. And in that stillness, I found something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Myself. Monday morning started with silence. No missed calls, no emails, no new texts. Just stillness. For a moment, I thought maybe they had given up. Maybe the weight of it all had finally sunk in. Maybe they were regrouping. But I was wrong. At 7:42 a.m., Lucas called from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was tense, forced calm. I need you to call me back. This is serious. Vendors are walking. The front desk systems won't boot up. We can't process payments. This is bigger than you think. I listened to the message in full, then deleted it. At 8:09 a.m., my mother's nonprofit issued an emergency email to board members. They had just discovered that the organization's operating account was frozen. The same account that until last week was quietly replenished by a monthly transfer from my personal holding fund. A copy of the email was forwarded to me by someone on the board. It contained phrases like unexpected shortfall and temporary accounting error, but I knew better. So did they. By 8:45 a.m., Jessica, the youngest of us, sent another text. Clarissa, please, we didn't think it would go like this. Just tell me what to do to fix it. I didn't reply. Because this wasn't a glitch. It wasn't about fixing broken wires or reconnecting payment gateways. It was about facing the truth. They had removed me the moment I stopped being useful. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer concern. Just a sentence. You're not one of us anymore. They made a decision. Now they were realizing what that decision cost. By 9:30 a.m., Claire, my friend at logistics, called again. Your dad's losing it, she said. His suppliers are demanding upfront payment. His team tried placing 3 orders this morning. All bounced. She paused. Do you want me to keep updating you? I thought about it. Then said, only if it gets worse. At 10:12 a.m., the trust officer called. He had been quiet since processing my withdrawal paperwork, but now his tone was different, hushed, careful. I just got off a conference call with your family, he said. They're asking if there's any way to undo the trust adjustments. Your father wants to propose a temporary suspension, not a full reversal. No, I said flatly. He cleared his throat. He mentioned that your sister tried to access the shared cloud archive, the one tied to the old contract backups. I already knew. My systems flagged the attempt at 3:19 a.m. that morning. Jessica had tried to reset the password using an old email one that only 3 people ever had access to: me, my father, and the trust officer. It didn't work. Instead, it triggered the auto lock and sent an alert to my private account. Inside that archive was a folder named Glass House. They all knew what it was, or at least they knew it existed. They didn't know what was inside: copies of contracts, ghost payments, site agreements made in my name, but never disclosed to legal counsel. Memos that, if surfaced, would raise questions they couldn't afford. They weren't just trying to regain access to infrastructure. They were trying to erase their tracks. Tell them I said if they attempt another breach, I'll forward the folder directly to the licensing board and the IRS. The trust officer exhaled, slowly. I figured you'd say that. That afternoon, I received a notice from a property manager at the Carmel House, one of the last assets still partially under my name. It was a simple message. Someone attempted access with an expired entry code. The last 4 digits. My father's birthday. They were testing, seeing if they still had a way in. They didn't. At 3:41 p.m., another email arrived. This one from the operations lead at Grant Hotel Group. Subject urgent. Complete access loss. He listed everything: CRM platform access revoked. Central reservation system offline. Vendor contact list unrecoverable. API integration tools locked. He ended the email with, "We were told all of this was under Lucas's control. That's what we were led to believe." I didn't respond. By 4:15 p.m., my mother's attorney called again. His voice was strained this time. "Tired. We're receiving board pressure. Elise's nonprofit may not survive another week of frozen funds." He paused, then added, "Your father is planning to liquidate part of his stake in Greenspine. Payroll is at risk. Staff are threatening walkouts." I said nothing. Then he asked what he really wanted to know. "Are you going to release any of the contents from the Glass House folder?" "No," I said. "Not unless they force my hand." He didn't ask what that meant. He knew. That evening at 6:12 p.m., my phone rang again. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it immediately. It was my dad. I didn't answer the first time, or the second. The third time he left a voicemail. His voice was unfamiliar. Not because it was different, but because it lacked the force I had grown up fearing. "Clarissa," he said, and paused. "We didn't mean for it to go this way. Your mother and we were angry. We thought you were turning your back on the family." He stopped again. "This isn't what we wanted." And that was it. The message ended there. I played it once, then saved it. Not out of sentimentality. As evidence. Not of guilt, but of the moment power shifted. That night my cousin Lee messaged me. She had always been quiet. Never involved in the business, never picked sides. She wrote, "I don't know what happened, but they're falling apart. Your mom is pretending everything's normal. Lucas has locked himself in his apartment, and your dad hasn't shown up to the last 2 meetings. People are asking questions." I replied with just one sentence. They told me I wasn't one of them. They just didn't expect me to take everything with me. By Tuesday morning, the cracks had turned into fractures. The nonprofit's board announced an emergency vote to freeze operations. Several members quietly resigned. One donor pulled a 6-figure pledge. My mother sent a short email. No one saw this coming. But that wasn't true. I did. For years, I watched them build on unstable ground. They leaned on my support like it was part of the foundation, never questioning whether it had limits. But I wasn't the helper. I was the system. They just didn't know it. They thought I was a plug, something you could yank out and replace if necessary. But I had been the blueprint, every strategy, every credit extension, every hidden bridge loan I had constructed it. Not as revenge, not for leverage. I built it because I believed in the idea of family and the silent work of holding others up. Until I didn't. The morning passed quietly until noon, when the trust officer reached out again. "I think it's time we meet," he said. "In person." We sat in his downtown office, the blinds half drawn. He looked exhausted. Not professionally, personally, like someone who had watched the same story unfold too many times. "They're unraveling," he said. I didn't respond. He continued. "Your father's on the verge of selling part of Greenspine to cover payroll. Your mother's nonprofit is under review. And Jessica's been denied for a private loan." I watched him shuffle papers he didn't need to shuffle. "She tried to blame you," he added quietly. "Said you controlled the nonprofit's books, that you were hiding things." I blinked. "She said that." He nodded, then looked up. "You weren't, were you?" "No," I said calmly. "I was just done cleaning up their messes." He paused, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black flash drive. "This is from your grandfather's archive," he said. "He left it with the trust years ago. Said it was for the one who walks away first. I think that's you." I didn't say anything. Back home, I plugged the drive into my offline machine. One folder. Inside were scanned letters, personal, typed on yellowing paper. Letters from my grandfather, to my father, to my mother, and to me. He had seen it coming. The control, the entitlement, the slow drain of love turned obligation. The final letter was addressed to me by name. If you're reading this, you've already made the hard choice. Don't let them back in. Not again. Not even once. I read the line twice, then sat still for a long time. The man had been gone for nearly 6 years, but somehow he understood me better than anyone else in that family ever had. That evening, I made one final move. The Carmel House, the only property still partially in my name. My parents used it every spring. They treated it like theirs, hosted friends there, posed in front of the garden for holiday cards. But it wasn't theirs. Not legally, not anymore. I transferred the deed to a private holding company I controlled, changed the locks, and updated the digital access. At 8:07 p.m., an email hit my inbox. Confirmation of ownership change. I forwarded it directly to my parents. At 8:26 p.m., my mom called for the first time in over a week. I let it ring. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I knew who it was. I peeked through the side curtain. My mother. No coat, no purse, just a bakery box in her hands, and that familiar smile, soft, practiced, the kind she used when she wanted something without asking for it. She didn't knock. She just stood there waiting, expecting. After 5 minutes, she gently set the box down, smoothed her sweater, and walked away. Inside the box were 2 blueberry muffins. From that overpriced cafe she used to mock until I gave her a gift card from there 2 birthdays ago. Tucked beneath the lid was a note. "Let's talk. We miss you." I didn't bring the box inside. I dropped it straight into the outside trash because I wasn't interested in muffins or revisionist history or curated regret. They were trying to crawl back, but not because they had changed. They were trying because the system had rejected them, and they finally understood they didn't know how to function without it, without me. Thursday was quiet, too quiet. No emails, no messages, no missed calls. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. At 10:32 a.m., the gate camera at the Carmel house triggered a motion alert. Someone had attempted access using an expired code. I checked the logs. The code ended in 4 digits, my father's birthday. They were still testing the lock, still trying to see if any old key might still open a door they no longer had rights to. At 4:00 p.m., I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was my father. "Clarissa," he began, his voice unsure, searching. "We didn't mean for it to go this way. Your mother and I, we were angry. We thought you were turning your back on us. But this isn't what we wanted." The message ended without anything clear. No apology, no clarity. Just that suspended feeling, like a man who had finally realized he wasn't the one holding the reins. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it, like a snapshot, a timestamp of a shift he couldn't undo. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table reviewing restructuring paperwork while my husband fed our youngest daughter. The baby giggled when the spoon missed her mouth, and my husband grinned like he hadn't laughed in days. For once, I felt something simple, grounded, clean. He looked up at me and asked, "Are you really sure about going through with the final lockouts?" I nodded. It's not revenge, I told him. It's recognition. He nodded back, said nothing more. At 7:40 p.m., my attorney called. He sounded almost amused, like someone who'd just opened a very strange letter. "They're claiming the Carmel house," he said. "Your mother submitted a note handwritten claiming you said they could use it any time." I blinked, then laughed softly. "I remember that note," I said. "Thanksgiving 5 years ago. It was on a sticky note. I just handed her the spare keys. She was complaining about her friends staying in hotels." He sighed. "They're desperate. We'll file the counter motion in the morning." "File it tonight," I replied. "I want everything dissolved. No shared assets, no lingering ties, not paused, not discussed. Dissolved." They thought this was about a house. It wasn't. They thought it was about some frozen accounts, some failed orders. It wasn't. The real damage was done the second they told me I didn't belong. And now they were standing outside doors they once walked through freely. They used to enter with entitlement. Now they arrived like strangers, unsure, with hands full of muffins, old notes, vague voicemails. And I was done pretending I couldn't see the truth. The following week, the noise began to fade. Not because things had been repaired, but because the people making the noise were running out of energy and options. The calls slowed, the emails softened. Even Jessica's tone changed. She sent an email longer than anything she'd ever written me in her life. She mentioned childhood memories, summer road trips, a birthday we spent on the lake. She said she missed me. But what stood out wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. No apology. No mention of Dad's message. No mention of the letter Mom slipped through my mail slot. Just soft, vague language meant to float above accountability. I didn't reply. I had no interest in rewriting the story into something gentler than it was. At 2:50 p.m. that day, my phone buzzed again. It was another alert from the Carmel property system. Someone had tried to unlock the gate with an invalid code. They hadn't asked. They hadn't checked. They just assumed maybe they could still get in. They couldn't. At 6:34 p.m. that Sunday, the doorbell rang. This time I opened it. I didn't need to check the camera. I knew. It was my father. He stood there awkwardly holding a large plastic tub. One of those storage bins you keep in the garage, the kind filled with dusty things you never quite throw away. Inside were old photo albums. He didn't look older. He didn't look broken. He just looked unfamiliar. Like a man who had once been sure of his place in the story and now wasn't sure if he still belonged in it. He didn't say my name. He just nodded toward the tub. "Your mother wanted you to have these," he said. I didn't answer. He hesitated, shifting the weight of the container in his arms. I stepped back, letting him place the bin down just inside the doorway. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. Before he turned to leave, he added, "We don't expect anything. Just thought maybe you'd want to see them again." Then he walked away. That night, after the kids went to bed, I opened the tub. The albums were thick pages sticking slightly from time. Pictures of camping trips, school, plays, birthdays. One shot showed me holding Jessica by the pool when she was 3. Another of my mother laughing in the sunlight, wearing sunglasses too big for her face. It all felt distant, like artifacts from a life I remembered living but no longer felt tethered to. Not painful, just expired. Over the next few days, the gestures kept coming. Small packages arrived, children's books, puzzles. One had a handwritten note from my mother. "Thinking of you all. Miss my grandbabies." She didn't use their names. She didn't ask to see them. It was like she was trying to rebuild something, but didn't know where to begin. Or worse, didn't realize she was standing on ashes. My cousin Lee visited one afternoon. We sat on the porch with coffee while my daughters played in the yard. She looked hesitant, like she'd been carrying a question for weeks. "Your mom's planning something for your daughter's birthday," she said finally, talking like she's still invited. I didn't answer right away. Then I told her the truth. "She's not." Lee nodded slowly. "You sure you don't want to? I don't know. Give them a chance." "I gave them decades," I said quietly. What matters isn't whether they're trying now. It's what they did when I said one honest thing that I couldn't help anymore, and they responded by cutting me off. There's no undoing that. Not with muffins, not with albums, not with soft rewrites of history. That week, the court finalized the trust dissolution. The last of the property separations went through. My attorney confirmed full legal severance. The Carmel house was officially mine. My business was clean. My name was mine again. And the grants. They were on their own now. Robert had to sell off 2 of his Greenspine assets to make payroll. My mother closed her nonprofit's physical office and switched to remote only. Jessica moved into a studio and started posting vague, inspirational quotes about fresh starts on Instagram. None of it was my concern anymore, because every bridge they used to cross into my life, financial, emotional, legal, was gone, locked, disconnected. And when they came back, they didn't come through the front gate. They showed up like visitors, knocking politely, waiting on the porch. And I finally understood what peace meant. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was clarity, a life built on truth, even if that truth meant letting go of the people who once called themselves my family. People say time heals. I don't think that's true. Time just makes the noise fade. But healing that only happens when you decide to stop reopening the wound. For years, I kept giving. Not just money, not just resources, but parts of myself. I gave silence when I should have spoken. I gave grace when I should have drawn a line. I gave again and again, because I thought that's what love meant. But love without respect isn't love, it's convenience. And I was convenient until I wasn't. They thought cutting me off would be the end of me, but really it was the beginning. The door they slammed shut was the same one I had never dared to walk through myself. They just made it easier. Now when they show up unannounced, uncertain, I don't argue. I don't explain. I open the door, I thank them for the gift, I say the kids are busy, and then I close it. They leave with the same polite smiles they used to wear when they were lying to my face. And me, I finally sleep. No more guilt texts at midnight. No more just one more favor. No more debt wrapped in affection. Just quiet. Not loneliness. Liberation. My mother still sends gifts, handmade cards, sometimes a sweater for one of the girls, a puzzle she thinks they'd like. She never asks to visit, she never apologizes, and I never invite her in, because you don't get to walk back into someone's life just because your hands are empty now. I remember what they looked like when their hands were full, and they still kept reaching for more. My cousin Lee told me some relatives think I'm being too harsh. They're trying, she said once. They've changed, but trying isn't the same as changing. Regret isn't the same as accountability. And silence isn't the same as forgiveness. I don't hold hate. I don't hold grudges. I just hold boundaries now. Because the truth is, when someone tells you they don't see you as one of them, believe them. And when you finally find your peace, don't trade it back for noise dressed up as family.